Hey boys and girls, happy Thursday. I am going to pick up where we left off with making bombs for Hitler. We are almost done. As a matter of fact, the last little bit is so short that I'm going to read one chapter today and then we'll be finished with it tomorrow. So really excited to see how it ends. So where we last left off with Lida, she had found Luca in the refugee camp, and Luca ended up finding out from the Red Army that his dad was alive and was a pharmacist. So he was going back home, and Lida's teacher had told her that she shouldn't let people know where she's from because it's controlled by the Soviets, and if they found out where she was from, they would know that she worked in this camp for the Nazis, and she'd be punished like she was a German Nazi. So even though Luca asked her to go with him, she stayed. She's still looking for Larissa, and it was a good thing that she stayed because then she found Natalia. Natalia had just come to the camp the night before. Found out that Katerina died. She stepped on a landmine. But Xenia is doing okay. That she is working in a kitchen and she's in a camp for Jews, but not like a concentration camp. So she's doing well. She's happy. So let's see what happens now. Chapter 22 is titled Lost. I was so grateful that the day Luca had left for Kiev, Natalia had arrived. She sat in class with the older children after our breakfast. Then we walked through the camp together, asking the clusters and groups that we met if anyone had heard news about a friend or a loved one. After supper, we went to the fluttering messages and painstakingly read each one. By the time we were finished, Natalia was in tears. So many people, all lost, she said. How will the survivors ever find one another? At least you found me, I said. She smiled at that. Yes, and I'm glad I did. I told Natalia that she could share the small converted office space that I called my bedroom. We walked to the supply area and an American issued her new blankets and a pillow. We stayed up late talking about our lost friends and family, food we'd been eating since the end of the war, food we'd love to eat again, things we'd love to do when we finally found our home. Will you go back to live? I asked her. I haven't decided. If I can't find my parents, brother, or sister, I will try to immigrate to Canada or to the United States instead. Even if I find a relative, I hope they'd come with me rather than go back to live. I sat up in bed and stared at her. But why wouldn't you want to go back there? It's part of the Soviet Union now, said Natalia. Her comment confused me, but Pani Zemluk told me that I should tell the authorities I was born in Liv. If Liv is part of the Soviet Union now, what's the point of lying? It's confusing, said Natalia, but people like me and your teacher who were born in pre-war Poland are allowed to leave if we wish. People who were born in pre-war Soviet Ukraine don't have a choice. They're supposed to go back. So you would rather go to a country you know nothing about instead of your old home? I will not live under Stalin, said Natalia. 4 years of Hitler was bad enough. I lay back down on my bedroll and considered her words. Life was certainly not good under Stalin. It had been bearable until my father was taken. I fell asleep, dreaming of a time when I was truly happy, when Tato was still alive, and Mama too, Larissa and me and the lilac tree. That was all lost now. I woke in the middle of the night to cries for help. Natalia stayed deep in sleep. I didn't wake her, but slipped out of the little office bedroom and ran toward the shouting. Through the darkness, I saw silhouettes of refugees down by the convent gate. I ran to them, weaving my way through the crowd. When I got to the front, Pani Zemlok was kneeling on the ground, cradling the limp body of a young man. His face and chest and arms glistened black with blood in the moonlight. Was this a refugee who had set out on his own and been attacked? Pani Zemlok looked up and scanned the cluster of refugees, her eyes filled with urgency. "You," she said, pointing to one of the healthier-looking men. "Help me carry him inside." Pani Zemlok wrapped her arms around the unconscious young man's chest and gingerly lifted him up, making sure not to let his injured head fall back. The young refugee carefully gripped him by the knees, and they carried him in past me. It was Luca. How could this be? I followed them to the first aid building and watched as they gently set Luca down on a cot. Then Pani Zemlok turned to the right. She turned on the light. Blood glistened on Luca's face. His clothing was torn, shredded at the knees, and his hands were covered with scrapes. "Lyda, get me a basin of water and some clean cloths," said Pani. I was grateful to be useful, anything to help Luca. I filled a basin with water and found bandages and cloths in one of the cupboards. I brought these over to Pani Zemlok, and she quickly wiped the blood away from Luca's face. Most of the blood had come from a single scalp wound, and once that was bandaged, he looked much more like himself. But what was he doing back here? And what had happened to him? 100 questions swirled in my mind. Finally, thankfully, Luca opened his eyes. I could see fear and pain in them as his gaze met mine. He gripped my hand and tried to speak, but all that came out were racking sobs. "Slowly, slowly," said Pani Zemlok. "Tell us what happened." He gasped in a few deep breaths, and after a while he found the strength to speak. "You were right, Lyda. I should never have tried to go back." I squeezed his hand. "All was well for the first part of the trip," he went on. "The officer stopped when we were a few miles along the road and gave us kielbasa and cheese. We sang and laughed and talked about the war. He seemed sympathetic about my time as an Osterbeiter." "When did things change?" asked Pani Zemlok. "He took us to a train depot at the border between the American and the Soviet zones. There were several dozen refugees who had been brought in from various camps, mostly men, but a few children and some younger women. As soon as we were out of view of the Americans, everything was different," said Luca. "No more food, no singing. Red Army soldiers punched and kicked me, then stole my boots and my satchel. They told me I would have no need for Western goods in the Siberian concentration camp they were taking me to." "So they weren't taking you to Kiev after all," said Pani Zemlok. It was a statement, not a question. "They told me that my father had died a long time ago. They said I was a Nazi." Luca wept. "But you were a prisoner of the Nazis," I said. "That doesn't matter," said Luca. "They told me that anyone who was captured by the Nazis is considered a Nazi. Those who aren't executed are to be sent to re-education camps in Siberia." Dozens of thoughts swirled through my mind. Natalia had been right, and so had Pani Zemlok. Luca didn't go home after all. He couldn't, and neither could I. The fact that I had no choice did not make it simpler. In the back of my mind, I had dreamed of going home someday, going there with Larissa. I dreamed of finding our lilac tree, maybe placing lilacs on our parents' graves. Now I knew I could never go back. Mama always said beauty could be found anywhere, but where was the beauty in this situation? I looked at Luca, beaten and despairing. He'd lost his father today, but also his country. Most of all, he had lost his hope for the future. "Luca," I said, gently squeezing his hand. I am here. I will not leave you. He was silent for a long time, but I could see the streams of tears coming from his closed eyes. I can only imagine the horrible thoughts he was having of his father's last days. After a while, the tears stopped, and I thought he was asleep. But all at once his eyes opened and they locked onto mine. Lyda, I am so glad you didn't come with me. How did you get away? After I was beaten, some of the other men were lined up and shot. They shoved the rest of us into boxcars. We pried away one of the floorboards in our car, said Luca. Those of us who were strong enough lowered ourselves through that hole and dropped down onto the tracks. I'm not sure how many got away because we scattered in all directions in the darkness of night. By some miracle, I wasn't caught. The hardest part was getting past the Soviet police at the border to the American zone. But luck was on my side again because the border police got drunk. I waited until they fell asleep and crept back across to the American zone. Rest now, said Pani Zemlok. You are safe. Luca tried to sit up. They may come back for me. Don't worry, she said. We will get you out of here. I stayed by Luca's side for the remainder of the night, curled up on a chair but wide awake. When Luca cried out in his sleep, I would squeeze his hand and let him know that he was safe. But how safe were any of us? What had happened to Luca terrified me. Now I knew for certain that none of us could ever go home. So we'll find out what happens tomorrow when we finish the story. Till then.